Okay, folks, welcome back to our series of lectures on different subjects. We're talking about real property. My director suggested that I tell you about what's going on with my face. So what I'm doing is I'm putting on this kind of a salve liquid that it kills pre-cancer cells. And I do this every couple of years to get rid of any cancerous cells on my face. And folks, the reality is that they're there because I was not very smart into my youth and was in the sun too much without sunblock and without covering. Now, for example, if I go to the beach, I go to the beach with a big hat, a long sleeve shirt, and long pants. But back in the days of my youth, I did not do that. So I've got cancerous cells all over my face, and this is what I have to do periodically to get rid of them. Okay, so let that be a warning to you. Take care of your skin and make sure that you use sunblock and covering up the best you can. Okay, back to our real property lecture, and we're going to talk about landlord-tenant issues. The first thing that I will say about landlord-tenant issues is read your lease. There's lots of stuff in there that you need to know, but you gotta read your lease, okay? So read your lease. That's the best advice I can give you. All right. Let's assume that you now are a tenant, or for example, maybe even a landlord if you're lucky enough. Although I'm not sure the landlords are any good right now. Hey, there was a new law in California that was passed and became effective the first part of 2020 called AB 1482, and it has a lot of different types of rights and duties on the part of landlords and tenants. Okay, so we're just now starting to work out the details in court of this law. And of course, then the virus came along and closed down the court, so we're getting even less guidance than we would have by this point. But anyway, it's something that both your landlord and the tenant needs to know. And it's beyond the capability of this particular lecture to go into the depths of AB 1482, but I'm going to give you a couple of different things about landlord tenants. Now, an eviction in California is called an unlawful detainer. An unlawful detainer is the kind of lawsuit that you file to evict somebody in California. And if I use unlawful detainer, think I'm saying eviction. When I'm saying eviction, think I'm saying unlawful detainer. Okay? Now let's go through the steps that have to take place before an eviction or an unlawful detainer can be filed. First, you've got to give a 3-day notice. Let's take an example of having somebody that hasn't paid their rent. First, you've got to give a 3-day notice to pay or conform. Then you have to give if they don't pay, then you have to give a second 3-day notice to quit. And each of these days is a court day, all right? Then, if they don't quit, then you give a 3-day notice to quit. Now, if the person has been in there for less than 1 year, and you just want to get rid of them, you have to give them what's called a 30-day notice to quit. If they've been in the property for more than 1 year, you have to give them a 60-day notice to quit. And if they're in a government subsidized housing, you've got to give them a 90-day notice to quit. Now, if they do not leave the property, during that time, you've got to file a complaint, just like any other kind of court action. You file a complaint. Okay? Now, the answer in that complaint is due within 5 days. So remember when we talked about complaints and answers in the first couple of lectures, you had normally 30 days to answer a complaint. In an unlawful detainer, you only have 5 days. Then you have the trial, if they do answer, and that must take place within 20 days. Most trials in California take place, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 2 years later. But in an unlawful detainer, you have 20 days to have the trial. And let's say the landlord wins. You haven't paid the rent and the landlord wins. You get what's called a writ from the court. A writ is a court order to the sheriff to do something. In this case, it is to go to the property and throw out the tenant. That's the writ. The sheriff goes and gets the writ, goes over to the property, posts. It is posted a notice and says, be out in 5 days or I'm coming back and throwing you out. Then the sheriff comes back in 5 days, and if they're still there, the sheriff escorts them out, stands there while the locksmith changes the locks. All right? Now, in California, under the new law, there's 2 kinds of evictions. There's a just cause eviction for somebody not paying their rent or for not performing the duties that are required in the lease. That's another reason to read the lease carefully. And then there's no fault. A no fault eviction is, for example, if you want to sell or if you want to move in yourself or some other real reason that doesn't have any fault of the tenant associated with it. In just cause evictions, you do what we just talked about. In no fault evictions, you've got to give the tenant, the landlord must give the tenant 30 days free rent. They can either give it to him in cash or they can give him the last month free. Now, there are many exceptions to the new law about whether the property is covered or not, so the best thing is to see a lawyer if you have a landlord problem or a tenant problem. Anyway, those are the things that we need to talk about in general for the landlord-tenant. Okay, we'll see you next time, and we're going to talk about antitrust for a couple of lectures. Thank you.